pleasure to be partnered with BTC. They've been supportive from the beginning when we started building the protocol itself. Welcome, dear guests, and a special welcome to Ivan. You know him as Ivan on Tech. He's been one of the most kind of influential vloggers. This is how they call them these days, and he talks a lot about cryptocurrencies, about blockchain. But what's interesting, he's not talking only about the high level of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. He's actually going very much into the guts of the technology itself, and also explaining what's the tangible need behind the blockchain technology. And this is not a coincidence. Ivan is with us today. We went also to Belgrade to visit our tech team, and we did kind of a reportage about what's going on behind the scenes as we speak, because we have a lot to show. First off, I would like to ask you to put down your mobile phones and not to look into blockfolios, because this is not the most important thing today. I'm sure you're all aware about the current situation in the market, and how many of you haven't checked Blockfolio today? One, two. That's very, very good. So instead of focusing on the market itself, we're going to focus on something that is bringing sustainability to the ecosystem. And we also have a live stream. I would like to welcome our community, the tracers. And the things that we are going to focus on today is the technology itself. And also my co-founder and CTO is going to, where is he? There he is. He's going to explain what kind of technical stuff we have done so far, and we're not going to hide it anymore. We have an important technical announcement to make, and Branimir is also going to go into the guts of this announcement. But before that, I would like to kind of focus our attention from the market, kind of steer that attention from the market into the technology and what OriginTrail has been building basically since 2011. And this is why the title "Hold Your Horses, We Build since 2018" is kind of a standing title today, because we want to iterate that projects need longevity. It's not about a market fad which comes and goes with 2018. It's important to show that projects that are involved in crypto actually have longevity that surpasses the the ICO craze and everything involved around it. So the kind of beginnings of OriginTrail date back into 2010, actually, when my two co-founders and myself engaged ourselves in a student project of a sort. We were actually helping out organic beef producers to differentiate their products from competition by revealing more information and by revealing more data about the production of beef products. And this is how kind of a rudimentary system was born. It was not called OriginTrail back then, but it gave us enough knowledge about the technology, about supply chains. We got our hands dirty about when working with something that was not as sexy back then as it is right now. If you think of supply chains and the blockchain, right now it's very much kind of logical that there is a natural fit between the two worlds. However, back then it was kind of a very, very hard to convince not that much the market, but private investors to jump in on board. And perhaps if it wasn't also for our advisor Andrei, which is also with us here, who also encouraged us to dwell deeper and to see how should we develop the project further and actually make something that is scalable out of it. So from 2011 all the way to 2014, when we actually graduated and also established our own company, we decided that it really makes sense to do something that we can offer not only to the industry itself, but also to consumers. And this is when we launched OriginTrail as a brand, allowing, first of all, food industry stakeholders to differentiate themselves basically by establishing data exchange between our kind of central solution and their ERP system, and we would then transform that data into a meaningful information for shoppers. So that was a very scalable solution. stakeholders in industry did not have to spend a lot on it because already from the beginning we were using the GS1 standards, and the most important standard that we used back then is EN13 code, which you can actually see on every product in stores. And this allowed us to kind of offer a solution which is not only scalable but cost effective and affordable for industry. And along with that, consumers would also kind of scan the product barcode, input expiry date, and then see where product actually originates from. Why is that important? If you look at statistics nowadays, according to a survey conducted in UK, almost 1/3 of food manufacturers cannot vouch for authenticity of ingredients they put into end product. And that's a staggering statistics. That's basically, imagine you have a product in your hand, and there are statistical chances that whoever made that product doesn't know, cannot substantiate claims behind that product. So that was pre-blockchain. That was a centralized solution. And then one of the most common questions that we received back then was, how can we trust information? How can you trust data that you're displaying to us? So that question came from consumers as well as it came from industry stakeholders. And we immediately took that question, that argument to our hearts, and started looking around as to how we could upgrade our technology. And this is when, back in 2015-16, it became quite apparent that blockchain technologies might become suitable for projects like ours. And we upgraded the system using the public Ethereum network into something that allowed us not only to store parts of the data, so the bulk of the data off-chain, but actually to hash the fingerprints, basically put the fingerprints of the files that we stored centrally into the public blockchain. Now that was done in food supply chains, and using blockchain for any purpose in supply chains, especially public blockchain, might be very much costly. And if you look at food supply chains, food is a very low margin item. So when you start using blockchain, and when you have this transaction going on for every batch, you necessarily, of course, also increase the variable cost of a product, which might very well also kill the profitability of a food business. And not to mention scalability, because in supply chains, when you're tracking products which go from one part of a supply chain, so from the beginning all the way to the end through manufacturing, retail, and into the consumer hands, you would need to capture data and describe that data using GS1 structure format for event-based tracking, which is called EPCIS standard. And if you look at those files structured according to that standard, and if you take into consideration that you're taking those files from several ERP systems, each placed within each respective kind of peer in the supply chain or network, then you would very soon figure out that blockchain might not be kind of the most natural solution to date. And kind of last but not least, through our experience, especially in China, we saw that supply chain participants are very afraid to share data amongst themselves, primarily because they are afraid they might lose competitive advantage if they share too much with their peers in the network. And so these are all the challenges that we kind of put in front of us and started drafting a white paper for a so-called OriginTrail protocol, which is the first purposefully built protocol for supply chains, allowing companies in supply chains and also in other kind of businesses which are not necessarily a supply chain type to exchange data amongst themselves in a very seamless way, in a secure way. And of course, since we use the protocol and blockchain layer, this data has integrity. I'm not going to go too much into details about the protocol because Branimir is going to describe that soon after me. But just to describe, so going from 2011, when we started off that project, and we kind of took a lot of experience, we got to know how supply chain looked like, all the way to 2014 when we launched our first solution, which was Central, and then we started using blockchain for real-life use cases from food industry. There was a lot of hands-on learning. And since we saw that these kind of solutions are very much needed, not only in Europe, but perhaps elsewhere, let's say in China, we decided that it makes sense also to test out the solution over there. And in 2017, I think it was late August, we also started conducting pilot project with online retailer from Shanghai, and this also gotten us into Walmart Food Safety Initiative program, and we were also selected as one of 3 most promising solutions tackling food safety issues in China, which was kind of a big thing for us, especially in this kind of a nascent phase when not only our solution is nascent, but actually the industry itself is very nascent, and we all need to learn a lot. And then also kind of throughout 2018, we were deploying technology, the test parts of the technology in several different verticals, counterfeit protection also using the GS1 standard, along with other companies that are now becoming the early adopters of our technology. Now, since end-to-end applications of blockchain in supply chains might be too kind of cumbersome to implement, since you would need to work with every supply chain participant respectively, and that's not scalable. We're only a team of 25 bright individuals, but nonetheless, it's a too small of a team to scale up the solution to the global levels. We have decided to partner with global leaders, not only GS1 as a kind of standard provider, but also the tech IT companies that are already providing solutions for supply chains. And this is how we partnered with several of them. This is kind of a global map of supply chain use cases that we have deployed in a very short time. And it ranges from the US, from the counterfeit protection, Europe, some cases that we have already presented, and also China and Vietnam. At this point, it's crucial to also point out that our technology not only interoperates between kind of different parts in the supply chain, also different IT providers can attach their solutions on top of the protocol, and kind of the cycle of attaching that has now gotten shorter, and we now see that service providers might start using the protocol in less than a week. And this is kind of our way towards building something that is more scalable, because it's one-to-many, not one-to-one. Also, Trace Alliance. Trace Alliance is a very loose organization, and its primary goal is to catalyze the adoption of knowledge related not only to blockchain and supply chains, but knowledge in general. It might also be the forensics technology, which is very much needed in supply chains. There are several very much interesting cases in Trace Labs. I would invite you to browse through the website and see what kind of companies we work with. But the list is not final. The list is even growing. And so this is bringing us to the next thing. I already mentioned that Branimir is going to talk more about the kind of technical announcement. But what's also very much exciting, and what has perhaps not yet been covered into depth, the way Branimir will do it right now, is the current solution as is. And Branimir, I would invite you to take the clicker.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you for the lovely clicker.
Yeah.
Thanks, Giga. Thank you all for coming. And we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to briefly introduce what problems the protocol is solving and the network, and then we're going to go into the guts of it. So we actually are all on the same page of what's going on here. But we started with actually a picture from yesterday, which is our team in Belgrade, and unfortunately only part of the team from Ljubljana, so we actually get to meet them, and we're very proud of them, so we decided to actually start with this. They are the builders of this whole, not only project, but also a network, which really becomes an ecosystem, as you have seen, with the companies and developers, as well as other institutions involved in the whole story. So what does the tech solve? Let's start with the problems. So there's two main problems. The first one is actually that you have a data fragmentation problem in supply chains. So essentially that means that every company stores a piece of data of what has been going on within their supply chain. And that data is usually stored in different forms. Sometimes it's not even digital. but most of the times it's different systems built by different companies on different standards. And essentially, when you take a supply chain, a very long one, you get a situation, kind of a data silo situation like here. By the legal requirements in the EU, by the way, when it comes to supply chains and traceability, a company needs to account for the partner before them, which is this one step back, and a partner after them in the chain, which is one step forward. And in that case, this is kind of the way that you can achieve a traceability. So essentially, everyone knows kind of part of the truth, what's going on in the supply chain, but no one knows the whole truth. The other problem is that actually this is really a centralization of data situation, where essentially it would be great if you could get this data somehow on one single place, but the question arises is, which is this one place? Who gets to control this place? So who controls the IP of that software that actually is going to have the data in one spot? And basically, it makes a lot of sense to decentralize and go with a decentralized solution, but unfortunately, as Giga already mentioned, when we looked at options of doing this with the existing solutions, we didn't find the appropriate features that this requires from the experience we actually had from previous projects, and I'll go deeper into it. But essentially, it comes down to data interoperability as well as the scalability that Giga mentioned, especially when it comes to public blockchains and their cost. So I'm going to quickly show you how we solve these problems. This is actually the OriginTrail protocol in a layered representation, and it is built specifically for data interoperability and interconnectivity. That means to easily be able to actually bridge those gaps that we've seen as the first problem. And also, kind of like as important as the first problem is to actually have data with integrity. So the idea would be to make sure that the parties that are involved in this data exchange can actually trust the data that they're exchanging with each other. In order to build this, we decided to build a very neutral protocol. So we actually solved the problems that I mentioned, the IP, the actual centralization problem, and having this data decentralized on an OriginTrail decentralized network actually tackles this specific issue. Finally, we naturally had to adopt open source, so we are building an open source implementation of the client. So I'm going to go briefly to the layers. Basically, we're going to start with the network layer just because we start with the decentralized network. So essentially, it's a neutral peer-to-peer network based on secure academia. And the whole idea of the network layer is actually to implement game theoretical ways of efficiently decentralizing the data that is getting onto this network. Because if you remember what Giga mentioned, Giga said we started fingerprinting data on the blockchain, but we kept the data still in a centralized database. And the question was, okay, we can verify the integrity of it, but because it's in one single place, controlled by one single entity, this data could disappear, could be altered. Someone could check that, or detect that it was altered, but essentially it wasn't immutable. So in that sense, decentralization was needed, and that's why the network layer provides for actual distribution of this data across a many number of nodes in this network. When it comes to the data layer, what do we actually do with the data? Well, basically, we started with standardizing the data based on the GS1 standards that we've been working on for a long time, as well as incorporating the Web of Things standard, which is an actual emerging and all-encompassing standard for IoT data. The most important kind of feature of the data layer is actually that it's based on graph logic. So when we actually started building the whole system, the first OriginTrail was built on relational databases, something that if you have been involved in development, you surely have encountered at some point SQL and similar databases, which are great. But what we ended up doing in the end, because we had to support many different cases in traceability and end-to-end transparency in these supply chains, we ended up simulating graph databases within relational databases. Basically, it was connection after connection, and this didn't scale well. So in the sense, if you had a lot of information with a lot of connections, very long supply chain, it could be slow, and it could actually be not that easy to manage. On the other hand, graph databases provide very easy interconnectivity, they're very flexible, and they're very fast because once you get a data in and you connect it in the right way, you get something called pre-join data, and that is very, very efficient when you want to do lookups on specific identifiers, which is what we want to do in supply chains. Now the blockchain layer, where does that come into the story, and why is it called the blockchain layer? Well, the whole idea of the network was that we want to save on twofold on cost. So if you would, let's say, put a bunch of this data on Ethereum, you would need to spend some gas cost, and when it comes to gas cost, it's quite high for storage. At certain times, I remember I saw the number was for 1 kilobyte, it took like $1,300 or something to actually store it. And supply chains generate much more data. So why is that? That's actually very rational, because when you have a blockchain, you replicate data on all the nodes in the network forever. So that has to be expensive. The way we approached the problem was we don't necessarily need to replicate on all the machines, right? So it's kind of similar to the idea of sharding in a way. And on the other hand, we don't need to keep the information on, for example, a certain yogurt that expires in a month forever. So in these two ways, we managed to design a system that is based on blockchain, which is there to actually manage the relations between the nodes in the network, that actually incentivizes behavior that is going to keep the data intact in a certain amount of time. That is also, that's one of the features. The other one is that we actually fingerprint this data. So we store a 32-byte hash on the blockchain, which then can be compared with the data itself, which you load from the actual network. And in that sense, you can always check if it has been changed. One important thing is that we didn't build the system that it necessarily is only based on one blockchain. So the idea is to support many different blockchains. And currently we are building it on Ethereum, but we're also doing some experiments with other blockchains. What is one of the core features of the protocol is that essentially it solves in a way the garbage in, garbage out problem that blockchains have. So a lot of people believe if you put some information on blockchain, it's immediately true. That obviously is not the case. So what we've actually come up with and actually wanted to use these features of the supply chain networks actually, is that we get cross-reference data from different parties that actually communicate about the same events in the supply chain. So we call it the consensus check. Basically, we compare the data they share on the same event and check how much and what percentage they match, and that includes public data, private data, as well as something that is sort of in between, which is really private data that has publicly verifiable properties for which we have designed the zero-knowledge protocol. So I'm actually going to explain this briefly. It might look a little too scientific, but I'll try to do it. So basically, this is the definition of zero-knowledge protocol, which basically says that some prover can prove to a certain verifier that they know some information without actually conveying this information. And that sounds a little weird, so let's try and explain it in our case what we built. So imagine you have a supply chain a company that takes two inputs, like something of the quantity of A and quantity of B, and combines them in some sort of product or maybe shipment with an output of C. And if we take a simple example of quantities, we could say that A plus B equals C, right? Many times these companies don't want to share these quantities because this can be sort of problematic information to get into the hands of the competitors. So what we've designed is a system where you actually don't share these values, you actually share the encrypted version of A, the encrypted version of B, and encrypted version of C, so it looks like an actual hash on the blockchain. And you can actually use a slightly different equation which takes the value of encrypted A, encrypted B, multiplies them, and in that way you can actually validate that it matches the value of encrypted C. There's some math involved behind this, but basically it involves a random set of K inputs that match to a certain event that actually produces a set of L outputs, and then these two vectors essentially with certain randomness involved generated for these vectors, you actually can validate this equation. How does this happen? Well, basically, the company would encrypt this data before publishing into the network, and then they would actually encode it with a certain private number, which is basically involved in an equation like this. And to kind of show finally how this works is we actually take these two vectors, and if the values are correct, this should match. So basically, you should be able to subtract one from the other and get some sort of encryption of 0. So the idea is that you necessarily don't know what have you subtracted from each other, but you actually know that it's a 0, and there's a cryptographic way to prove it. Not to go deeper into this, there's a paper we published that can be seen on our website. But it's actually a very powerful feature, and so far we've received really good feedback from the companies. So we actually launched our first testnet in June 29th, and this was called the Apollo testnet. So far has been shown a lot of interesting, we got a lot of interesting feedback, and we were running a beta program. We're still running it with 875 actual members, and it involves 30 releases of code. So we've actually started with a rapid to sprint development cycle, but at some points we actually even accelerated it. And what did we learn from Apollo? So we basically, it was sort of an iterative approach, and every release brought sort of new findings. So one of the things is when we have this information published to the network, a certain bidding mechanism happens. So because it's a free market and the nodes in the network can actually decide if they want to participate in a certain bid or not, they get to bid on how much and for how long, and for how much tokens they get to actually store a certain piece of information. And this first kind of version of the mechanism we built turned out to be kind of costly and didn't live up to the standard that we wanted. So we actually implemented, and we implemented a new version. We raised the efficiency for a whole order of magnitude. So it's actually today, if any one of you knows or anyone listening through the live stream, we are actually publishing an update, and we have completely changed the mechanism. So now it only involves 2 transactions that are done by the DC node, the one publishing the data to the network, while DH nodes that actually can be run by anyone, they actually do not spend or make transactions on the blockchain if not needed. We also introduced the ERC 725 standard, which is an emerging identity standard on Ethereum. We increased the node resilience, solved a lot of issues. We launched the OriginTrail Network Explorer, which actually lets you find this data on the network as through a kind of a nice user interface. It is sort of like a block explorer, like Etherscan. And finally, we got a lot of feedback on our node interface, which is called Houston. So that is a kind of a remote controlled application for the node. So where do we go from here? Well, it's my pleasure to announce that after all this work and effort, we are ready to actually move beyond the testnet phase. So today we are announcing that we will be launching the OriginTrail Vostok Mainnet. And Vostok being the actual name of the first human space flight that Yuri Gagarin actually was in. So what is the Vostok Mainnet? It's actually the first stage of the mainnet, and it will be launched on December 7th. This mainnet will actually be the first one that gets with real contact with the market conditions. So it's going to use the trace token, not the test trace token, and the actual Ethereum main network. We will slowly be introducing the litigation mechanisms that we've been developing so far, and basically we will be running the bug bounty program in parallel. So essentially this is the time to apply to join this Vostok mainnet, because we will be slowly onboarding node holders who want to participate and help us jumpstart this whole system step by step. So essentially we want to announce 4 stages of the mainnet at this time. The Vostok stage I already explained. We will follow with the freedom stage. The freedom stage will actually finalize all the processes I just mentioned. It will be open for everyone, so not only the ones who apply to join the Vostok Mainnet, but actually anyone who wants to download the node. And by the way, anyone can apply for the mainnet. We basically just want to have sort of an onboarding period where we have the ability to help out and monitor how the network works in this setting. The next stage would be the Gemini stage, where we want to go a step further and actually start bridging different technology worlds, both blockchains as well as other technology, be it decentralized or centralized, by utilizing the actual interoperability and interconnectivity features that we are specifically building. And then in the pioneer stage, which comes after that, we want to introduce further tokenization ideas on data. So the idea would be to show even more utility to the actual token. So with having that said, I hope I didn't bore you a lot. I invite everyone to apply and to actually come to this website. So if you want to be one of the first node holders, actually start getting those tokens and learning how to run your own node, and at the same time help us by providing some additional information on this, you're very welcome. That's it. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Tomas.
Thanks, Brana. Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit shorter, but today, with what Branimir just announced, it's a great thing for OriginTrail. This sets the foundation. This sets the foundation of the real protocol. This sets the foundation of the entire ecosystem. And those of you that maybe have looked into OriginTrail's white paper some time ago, that was the first sentence. So OriginTrail is not a company. OriginTrail is an ecosystem. And this ecosystem has been growing so far, and we see it growing in the future as well. Trace Alliance, Giga mentioned that, just raising number of members that we see literally week over week. There's strategic partners that are joining in, which are promising a much even larger kind of adoption potential for the real thing that's now going to be available real soon. We're seeing partnership with public institutions, such as the recent project, European project that we're a part of, the Smart Agri Hubs, which has over 100 partners around Europe, really focusing on digitalizing the agriculture in Europe. And these are just some of the cases that we're seeing that are being worked on, that's going to utilize this technology and bring it out in the nature, if you will. Yeah, and this kind of the ecosystem also implies that it's collaborative, and supply chains by nature are always collaborative. They have to be. It's not the altruistic approach to go down that road. It's an approach of common sense and previous experience. There's no way a single entity or single company can solve these challenges, no matter how big they are, or no matter how thick their technological stack might be. It's always required for several different partners to work together. And this is why we are taking the approach that we are. At this point, I think also some thanks are in order. Thanks to our existing partners, including BTC for hosting us here, and many others around the globe that are helping us develop this technology, trial it, and bring it to market. A big thanks to our community and tracers also that are watching online, as well as all of you that are here offline. And as well, I wanted to invite you all to a couple of things. One, of course, and the most important, the OriginTrail Vostok Mainnet is opening applications for running a node. So a more avid technical users are more than welcome to apply and go through the process. Second one, the open call finishes in 2 days. So there are the steer the opportunity to become a part of OriginTrail ecosystem and take advantage of the awards that we are offering through an open call. So our community will have the opportunity to award 10 of the best, what they think to be the best use cases of the propositions to be built on OriginTrail protocol, and they're going to be receiving the awards in the total amount of $135,000, I believe. So that's the other invitation. Yeah, I think the entire, one very important thing that I almost forgot, I would hate myself to do it. I have to say big thanks to the team. So the entire team has been working restlessly. It's been a very long kind of period of very intense work. It goes from really all the different kind of fields that we're covering, and I think as a whole we've been kind of working quite exceptionally to bring the vision that was set out into the flesh and make it a reality. And I'm really excited also to be working with these very talented individuals as a team in the future, and be interacting with all of the different stakeholders of the ecosystem to bring this technology from Vostok stage to all of the other stages and make it even better in the future. So of course, all of you that were able to join the event in offline, I thank you for coming, and I also warmly welcome you to get some nibbles and some drinks. To all of you that are watching online, thank you for tuning in, and of course, as always, we are available on all the communication channels around. So thank you very much for coming, and please hang out. Ivan is still here with us as well.
Time for drinks?
Yes.
Okay.